2021 has so far been a rough year for cinema, with movie theaters across the globe only now just starting to open up again. But it's actually been a pretty great year for horror. As of the time this list was written, the likes of The Quiet Place Part 2 and The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It hadn't quite come out yet, so I'm gonna have to let you make up your own minds about them. But not to worry, there are 10 great horror flicks on this list you won't want to miss. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are the 10 most terrifying horror movies released in 2021 so far. Number 10. WILLY'S Wonderland. WILLY'S Wonderland is an absolute blast of a movie, but while the carnage and chaos is glorious and plentiful, the terror of this bonkers Nick Cage vehicle isn't quite at the level of the rest of the films featured on this list, hence why this picture just sneaks in at the number 10 spot. For those of you who are familiar with the Five Nights at Freddy's video game franchise, this is basically that, but with a good dollop of Cage thrown in for good measure. Taking a job at a kid's play park, Cage's janitor soon finds himself in the sights of a slew of monstrous, murderous animatronic beasts who are out for blood. While the film has Nick Cage very much at his most Nick Cage, that doesn't take away from some genuinely creepy, chilling scares. Again, very much in the mold of the haunting, lurking, hidden in plain sight scares of the Five Nights at Freddy's games. The one major shame with WILLY'S Wonderland is that, like so many others, it was robbed of its initially planned cinema release due to the global pandemic. Thankfully now the film is now out in the wild and can be found on home release and video on demand. Number 9. Lucky. Think Happy Death Day but reversed and with a touch more horror. That's the most basic description of Natasha Kermani's Lucky, which is now available globally on Shudder. As is often the case though, there's obviously a little bit more going on than that underneath the surface. Headlined by modern-day horror fave Brea Grant, Lucky focuses on the self-help author May and the mysterious masked man who stalks her every single night. For Grant's May, even when she kills this strange figure, he still turns up again the following night to send chills down the spine in a continuous cycle of torment. The overarching message of Lucky is about the abuse, both mental and physical, that women can experience at the hands of men. And at its core, with the film very much on her back, Brea Grant, who also wrote the movie, is the perfect choice to drive the picture, putting in a performance that is powerful, poignant, and packs an almighty punch. It may have slipped under the radar for some, but Lucky is a movie you definitely want to pop on your to-watch list sooner rather than later. Number 8. Wrong Turn. Was anybody crying out for another Wrong Turn movie, let alone a reboot of the franchise? Probably not. Having first arrived in 2003, the Wrong Turn series has desperately tried to cement itself a spot as a classic horror franchise, yet it's largely been disappointment after disappointment for those poor souls who've sat and watched all 6 pictures that came before this year's reboot. With that in mind, it is refreshing to see that this year's Wrong Turn do-over is actually pretty good. Rather than gratuitous gore and the same old cannibalistic tropes that became old hat midway through Wrong Turn Dead End, the second film in the series, this 2021 offering actually takes the franchise in a more subtle, nuanced direction. Clearly it's not Hitchcock, Carpenter, Craven, or Wan when it comes to delicate, delightful terrors, but this year's Wrong Turn is a huge upgrade on so much of what's gone before. Yes, the plot revolves around a slew of pretty young things venturing out of their element and finding themselves tormented by a vicious community, yet Wrong Turn 21 holds back on its brutality and scares, enough so that when they do come, and man, they do come, these moments are all the more impactful for it. Number 7. Great White. One of the most popular corners of horror is of course the shark subgenre. For better or for worse, there's so often a certain intrigue about shark movies, even for those utterly bizarre and outright bad efforts, like Sand Sharks, Sharktopus, Mega Shark vs. Mecha Shark, Six-Headed Shark Attack, and Ghost Shark. All of which, yes, 100% are genuine feature films. This year, the clear highlight so far in the subgenre is Martin Wilson's Great White. As one would expect from a picture with such a title, at the crux of this survival horror is the Great White Shark. Shot and set in Australia, Great White follows a group of 5 who find themselves stranded at sea, floating in a safety raft as the toothy threats of the deep keep a watchful, hungry eye on them. Admittedly, the movie's sharks can look slightly shaky when viewed close up, but Great White thankfully applies the less is more tactic when it comes to showcasing its apex predators. And while that approach conjures up some nerve-tingling tension, so too does the fractious relationships between the human characters, who find themselves fighting for their lives. Due for a full theatrical release this July, Great White has already made its way to several streaming platforms. Number 6. Bloodthirsty. For as long as there's been horror, there's been werewolf tales, and 2021 offers up Bloodthirsty. In this Amelia Moss-helmed offering, Lauren Beatty plays Grey, a singer-songwriter desperate to get that big hit song that will propel her to the next level of her career. To do so, Grey heads to a remote music studio out in the wilderness, where she soon starts to get a little teethy, a little hungry, a little visceral, a little savage, and well, yeah, she begins to veer towards lycanthropy. Bloodthirsty is brimming with impeccable visuals, especially those that depict Grey at her most primal and desperate, including a grimace-inducing scene when Beatty's character slurps down the juice from a slab of raw meat. It's in these more stomach-churning moments where the true terror of this picture lies, with a bunch of scenes that are certain to stick with you once you finish the film. The one major downer of the movie? Why, that'd be getting to hear Grey's big song over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Other than that though, Bloodthirsty is a ferocious little beast with a hell of a bite. Number 5. Spiral, from the Book of Saw. Of all the movies on this list, this one certainly has the biggest budget, the most well-known cast, all of that hype, and of course the Saw name going for it. Many wondered what to expect when it was first announced that funny man Chris Rock was relaunching the Saw brand with an idea he created himself. And to Rock's credit, Spiral hit so many of the right beats required for this picture. Now we're gonna hold back on the spoilers just in case you haven't seen it. What can be said though is that the feature manages to carve up an offering that's both familiar but refreshingly new, all while having the gruesome grisly scares and mangled bodies one would expect from a Saw movie. Rock plays a police detective forced to work with a new rookie, just as a Jigsaw copycat starts to target the city's immoral, corrupt cops. Very much in the same vein as previous Saw offerings, traps and life or death scenarios lie in wait for those in the crosshairs of this new killer. Spiral stands as one of the better offerings in the Saw franchise, with sinister scares and gut-wrenching tension by the bucket load. Number 4. Saint Maud. It took a good little while for this one to make its way to the masses, but it was seriously worth it. Having premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival in 2019, plans to release the movie were hit hard by the pandemic. Initially due to hit cinemas in the first half of last year, Saint Maud instead got a hugely limited, brief theatrical release last Halloween, before the picture was made more widely available this February. Without any sense of hyperbole, Saint Maud is one of the greatest horror films of the last decade, and certainly one of the best British horror movies ever made. Both bold statements, but both 100% true. So far, this is the greatest horror picture of 2021, although it's not quite the most terrifying. From writer-director Rose Glass, the attention here is on Morfydd Clark's Maud, a recently converted, utterly dedicated Roman Catholic nurse who becomes obsessed with a dying ex-dancer who she's tasked with caring for. Effortlessly stylish throughout, the horrors and chills of Saint Maud aren't immediately clear, and Glass's effort is very much a slow burn. For Rose, she starts to have what could be construed as a crisis of faith, yet is possibly more down to the impact of loneliness and isolation, which in turn leads to larger questions about mental well-being. By the time Saint Maud is drawn to a close, the sleek, suave tone of so much of the movie's opening act has long since diminished, as the plot spirals out of control and ends with a genuine kicker of a conclusion. To say any more would be getting into spoiler territory, and there is absolutely zero way that we're spoiling something as stunning as Saint Maud here. Number 3. The Queen of Black Magic. As horror fans, audiences have been conditioned to wince at the mere mention of the word remake, or reboot, or reimagining, or recalibration, or you get the point. Where The Queen of Black Magic is concerned, it has the benefit of being a fairly loose remake, a remake of a movie many have never heard of, and is a genuinely good horror picture. Based on the 1981 film of the same name, Kimo Stembol's take on The Queen of Black Magic is a gripping, gory offering that hits so many of the right notes that horror hounds seek out. While the gore is indeed plentiful when it comes, the film is far more than that when it comes to terror and torment. For The Queen of Black Magic primarily plays on the supernatural in order to establish the initial dread of the tale. Plot-wise, Stembol's offering, much like the 81 original, centers on dark magic, deep-seated revenge plans, and mystery, as 3 childhood friends and their families return to an orphanage to pay their respects to the gravely ill man who played a part in raising them. There's a somewhat steady and slightly too plodding start to this one, but once it picks up, it seriously picks up. Number 2. The Night They Knocked. To be blunt, the vast majority of the protagonists in The Night They Knocked are so annoying you'll probably be rooting for the bad guys to kill them. The thing is, said bad guys are nothing if not brutally terrifying. In terms of plot, The Night They Knocked sees your regular bunch of generic college kids head off for a remote weekend vacation, only to find themselves tormented by a bunch of deranged, face-painted, barbaric maniacs. Clearly the premise here is one that's, at least on the surface, rather run-of-the-mill. But The Night They Knocked will surprise many a horror fan bold enough to give it a try. A low-budget offering, this Sean Roberts-directed picture is way more than the sum of its parts. Sure, The Night They Knocked may have had one or two so-so performances in it, yet there's no questioning the eye-widening fear that some of the movie's scenes conjure up, with one kill in particular being utterly unique and 100% horrendous to imagine. This film's memorable, legitimately terrifying moments and jarring, thudding finale make it a flick that's truly worthy of your time. Number 1. The Power. Taking things back to 1974 and throwing in an eerie hospital setting, Karina Faith's The Power is a minimal, thoughtful, and utterly chilling supernatural offering, headlined by Rose Williams, who is on phenomenal form as Val. The Power finds poor Val being hit from all angles as she starts a new job as a nurse at London's Royal Infirmary. Brimming with eagerness and a positive outlook, Val is forever browbeaten and discouraged for any glimmer of positivity or enthusiasm. So much so she finds herself punished for this by being put on the unenviable night shifts that take place while scheduled blackouts occur. As in, not only is the hospital already creepy enough, Val has to venture through it in pretty much complete darkness. Scared of the dark and yet to get a grip on the layout of the hospital, it's no surprise that Val is easily startled. And as for the audience, you find yourself watching through your fingers as every inch of your off-darkened screen threatens to throw up something terrifying. Of course, there are plenty of terrifying things that'll be popping up, but this one doesn't just rely on ghosts and ghouls to get the job done. The larger picture of the movie tells a tale of sexism, repression, and elitism, all things that are often still scarily prevalent here in 2021, 47 years after the film is set. That's it from me. Do let me know what you think is the most terrifying horror movie you've seen this year. As always, I've been Jess from More Culture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great spooky content.